My name's Kim. I'm one of the elders at the church here, and I'd just like to welcome everyone. There's young and old, and that's great because the message tonight, it concerns everyone on the whole planet. And we've got two fantastic presenters, Pastor Gary and Pastor Gary. And I'm just going to do some housekeeping. The toilets are just down the foyer. The first doorway is the ladies and the second is the men's. And down the hall further, we will be having a light supper after the first two presentations. The presentations will run around 40 to 45 minutes, depending. And then we will hear some amazing things, things you may have heard before and things you may not have heard before. And hopefully that you'll be touched and you'll understand what's going to happen to our planet and what is going on. So Pastor Gary Webster was going to lead off, so I promise you your lives will be changed. Mine was, and I know that the Bible, every answer for our world is in the Bible. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Pastor Gary up.
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. We sort of had a rush trip from Chermside. We had quite a lot of people down there, and it's good to be here in Reedy Creek. We're going to take a fascinating journey in 4 quick presentations tonight. I hope it gives you a little bit of an insight as to where things are heading. We'll be looking at this first presentation. We're going to be going to amazing discoveries, and then we'll be looking at the last empire after the dinner. Then we'll be looking at global warnings, and finally the global agenda, what is taking place today on fronts that indicate where we're heading right now. But let's move into the first presentation, Amazing Discoveries in Lost Civilizations, and we're looking at the prophetic code. Anybody travelled to Egypt or any of these places? Okay, I have to be careful what I say. Can't give any whoppers, can we? You'll be able to check up on me. Anyway, we'll be going to some interesting places tonight as we travel. Many people today are concerned about what's taking place in the world on many fronts. Take, for example, the Ukraine crisis. I mean, we know what's happening in Alaska right now, or about to. The meetings between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, and what's going to be the outcome of those things. Of course, many people in Europe are very worried. I noticed a few months back they increased their defence spending in Europe because they're worried what might take place as a result of what is taking place in the Ukraine. And then I even noticed they've even in France they've got a survival manual for people. This gives you an indication of where people's concerns are in Europe today. And then we have the crisis in Gaza, and many worry about not only what's happening to the poor people, the Palestinians living in Gaza, but the possibility of this thing spreading further as a result of what's taking place. Then there are the increasing US-China tensions, not just in the South China Seas, but economically. You know what's going on in the background there. Even in our own country, we have rising crime rates around our country today. This has many concerned. Where are we headed in this space here? And then we have the issues with the environment, climate change and so on. Many scientists are deeply concerned about where we're heading in that space. And then ticking away in the background is the fragile global economy. Many economists believe it's not a case of if, but when the house of cards will come crashing down. Very concerned on that front. It leads to this very important question. Many people are asking, what does the future hold? Where exactly are we heading today? Even the ancient people were interested in the future. Maybe you've travelled to Greece, but if you ever go to Greece, make sure you go to Delphi. It's a fascinating place up in the mountains, 2 or 3 hours from Athens. But this is the place where they had the famous oracle. Now, the oracles, these were ladies, Pythias they were also called, who came here to the temple of Apollo. there was a crack in the rocks, and they sat on a tripod stool over this crack where gases were coming up, and they are said to make predictions, telling people what the future holds. Very famous people came to visit the oracles of Delphi over the centuries. People like Alexander the Great came here, as did the Emperor Nero from Rome. So many people wanting to know back then, what does the future hold? Where are we headed? You've probably noticed the increase of the columns in column centimetres for the psychics in our own newspapers and glossy magazines. It's increased quite a lot over the years. People, of course, wanting to know, where are we heading? Not just about their love life or their finances, but, hey, where are we heading in society? Remember the year 2012, the Mayan calendar? A lot of things were supposed to happen, but what happened? Well, nothing happened. Now, I'm certainly not knocking anybody, far be it from me. But the point I'm making is there were a lot of people making predictions, but nothing happened. Can some of you remember the year 2000? What was that bug that was going to wipe out the electrical grids? Y2K. Now I'm testing your memory, isn't it? Some of you weren't born yet. Y2K. But that was going to wipe all the electrical grids out and we're going to lose power. But what happened? Well, nothing happened again. As I say, not making fun of anybody, but just to make a point, it's not easy to predict the future. Thousands of people all over the world at that time were making predictions. I noticed these Times magazines a few years ago did a survey on the predictions of the psychics, and they discovered in their survey that just 6 out of 250 predictions actually were correct in their survey. It's just 3%. You could guess at it and just about do as good. Again, not knocking anybody, it's not an easy game to be. We know that the average leading psychic's batting average is just 16%. So for most of them, well, the average, I should say, for every 100 predictions they make, only 16 are correct. Now that's okay if you're on the right side of the 16, but not so good if it's in the other 84, right? You're in trouble if you've sort of put your money on the table for something. Which leads us to this vital question. Can we really know the future, or is it just wishful thinking on our parts as human beings? Very important question. Now, if you were going to consult somebody who says, I know how to predict, I know the future, I can predict it for you, you would really want to be asking 2 questions of them, or wanting to find out 2 things. Number one, do they have historical accuracy? What do we mean by that? If they can't even get the facts right about the past or what's happening in the present when they talk about it, how on earth can you trust them with the future? You'd want to have something solid under your feet in terms of historical accuracy. The second thing you'd want is you'd want to have a source. They have a proven track record of fulfilled predictions. Not a batting average of 3% or 16%, but 100%. You'd want that, wouldn't you? You imagine if I said to you, listen, I'm a guru on the stock market. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. Now, would you, if I told you, listen, borrow money, mortgage your house to get some more cash, and make sure you buy Qantas shares tomorrow morning because they're only going to be 1 cent each tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, but on Thursday, they're going to be worth $100 each. And back on next Sunday, they're only going to be back to 1 cent. Would you borrow money and mortgage your house just because Webster says so? I doubt it. But maybe you'd go and Google Webster stock market, and if you found out that every time the thing went up or down, I was correct, I reckon then you might think about it, right? You'd want to check up on my track record. That's the point of predictions. And so you would certainly want a source that has a proven track record. Is there such a source? Yes. There absolutely is, and Gary Kent and myself will be sharing with you evidence from both archaeology, university history, and current events that you can see, wow, this is an amazing source that clearly knows where we're heading into the future. All right, so let's go and begin with archaeology. We want to look at the 3 most important discoveries that archaeologists have made. Now, not the most famous, that'd probably be King Tutankhamun's treasures and a few other things, but certainly the most important to us as people on the planet. Number one is here in Egypt with Napoleon Bonaparte. 1798, his workmen and his soldiers who were with him on this campaign that he had were in the delta area of the Nile at a place called Rosetta, and they discovered this famous stone. It's in the British Museum today in London. If you ever go there, it's the first thing you'll see when you get into the British Museum. You'll notice it's in 3 sections. They guess that this is the same message written in 3 different scripts. The top section is Egyptian hieroglyphic writings. Now, nobody could read it up to this time because it's on the tombs and the temple walls in Egypt, but what does it mean? Nobody knew. The middle section is what we call Demotic. It's a cursive Egyptian hieroglyphic script. And then the bottom section is the Greek, which, of course, we've known how to read that for centuries. So they worked from the known Greek language at the bottom, and over a period of 20 years, they were finally able to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphic writings, thanks to especially a guy called Jean-Francois Champollion, a Frenchman. Now, what did this mean? Well, it simply meant they could now unlock the history, the culture, the medical practices, the religious beliefs of one of the greatest civilizations of antiquity, Egypt. This was a very important discovery. The second one is here in Iran. Anybody been to Iran here? Okay, it's a great place, isn't it? I've been there, I think, 3 times now. Very friendly people. Most people in Western countries think everybody's got a hand grenade in their hand and an AK-47 or something. It's not like that. In fact, you know what? I've been there 3 times. I've only saw 1 gun. That was in a soldier had it up on a guard tower on an army base. You'd expect that. But if you go to Israel, for example, every man, woman and his dog's almost got a gun, I should say. I've seen stacks of them this high. I remember I was at the Sea of Galilee one day, and this guy's fishing. And across his back's this automatic weapon on his back, and I thought, those poor fish, they're going to really cop it when they get out of the water. Obviously, it wasn't there for the fish. But in Iran, very friendly people, lovely people, and I guess you don't want to be on the wrong side, of course, of the Iranian leadership, but a lovely place to visit. We want to come to a place outside of a very important city in Iran called Kermanshah. We come to a place called Behistun. This is on the Silk Road from China across towards Europe. Now, just as people graffiti things today, right? I don't know about here in Brisbane, I know in Sydney almost sometimes every second train that goes by is graffitied. They used to graffiti in these places, especially on this area, because this is a cliff face, and a number of inscriptions are here, put up there by the kings of antiquity. This one is very important to us, known as the famous Behistun inscription. Not so important for the story and the who's who, but we should point out who's who. This king here, he's mentioned in the biblical manuscripts, and of course in antiquity, he's the one, Darius the Great, who marched his soldiers into Greece and had the famous fight with Leonidas and his guys. Remember the guy that got betrayed? Anyway, it's not the story that's important, it's the fact that it's written in 3 different scripts, this time of what we call the cuneiform. This was the script of the people living in Mesopotamia. And thanks to guys like this fellow, a British soldier by the name of Henry Rawlinson, who was in this area, he was able to take a paper mache squeeze of this thing at great risk to his life. And so after many years, they were able to decipher, thanks to the 3 different scripts, the cuneiform language. And we have thousands of clay tablets written in cuneiform. Just a few years ago, a fellow from Austria was picking up a clay tablet, and it mentions a guy by the name of Nebo-Sar-Sekem. You know, who cares about a name like that? Well, he's actually mentioned in the biblical records. And just reading these clay tablets, many of them never been read in the basements of the British Museum and other museums, We were now able to read this, which meant now we can unlock the history of Mesopotamia, their cultural practices, their religious beliefs, and everything else. So we have a great insight into what many believe is the cradle of civilization. The third of the most important discoveries is here at the Dead Sea. Anybody been to the Dead Sea area? You're right. How to swim in the Dead Sea? Of course, you don't go to the Dead Sea without swimming. A good place to learn, by the way, you can't sink. It's so salty. Just don't open your eyes or have a cup and put it under the water. You'll know all about it. But here at the Dead Sea on the northwest corner, that's in the Israeli side of the Dead Sea, back in 1947 at Qumran, a couple of young Bedouin boys were minding the clan's goats. And one of the goats strayed up into an area where there's some caves, because there's a lot of caves in this area. They threw a stone to get the goat back. They missed the goat. It went into the cave and they heard the sound of pots or something breaking. So they raced up, hoping to find treasure, but all they found was these old pots, and inside some very old-looking scrolls. Well, they took them back to their Bedouin clan, and the Bedouin clan took them to Bethlehem, where there was an antiquities dealer by the name of Mr. Kando. And Mr. Kando purchased them for $100 US. Just a few years later, those scrolls were selling for $500,000 US. So Mr. Kando probably made himself a windfall. But today, those scrolls, of course, they're priceless. And they're famously, obviously known as the Dead Sea Scrolls for obvious reasons. But why are they so valuable? Why wouldn't you really be able to buy them today? Not that they'd want to let go of them anyway. The reason is for a few reasons. One, they're very old, and anything that's old seems to fetch a price, right? The older, the more expensive. How old are they? Well, we know from a couple of two or three reasons. Number one, the style of the script. You see, script styles change through time. You try reading 16th century English. Most of us wouldn't have a clue almost, you know. It's very difficult. It's still English, but it's changed through time. Well, same with the ancients. They knew when this Hebrew script style fits in time. So they knew from that. They also did radiocarbon dating on these scrolls. And then finally, they found coins in some of the caves with some of the scrolls. And of course, coins have people's picture on them, the image. So they knew, based on these three methods, that they date back to 100 to 200 or more BC, even back as far as what we call the 3rd century BC. So very old scrolls indeed. Now, what's important to us here in this presentation tonight is that these scrolls contain ancient predictions with a very proven track record. And you'll see that this evening. What are these scrolls? Well, about 30% were the rules and the regulations of the group of people who wrote them. We believe they were a group called the Essenes, a group of Jewish monks living out in the Judean desert. So it had their rules and regulations for their society. About another 30% were their beliefs that they held as a group of Jewish monks. The biggest proportion, just over 40%, were every part of the ancient Old Testament biblical manuscripts except the book of Esther. If you've ever been to a motel, I'm sure you have, and you see a Bible usually there from the Gideons, right? Well, the Bible is divided into two sections. The first half is called the Old Testament, and every book of that part of the Bible, except the book of Esther, was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are just the copies, not the originals, of course. The originals go back much longer than that. Now, something else that interested the scholars was when they saw these old scrolls dating back so far, has things been changed from what you may have in your Bible at home or you've seen in the motel room? Has it changed? Well, they were able to compare their oldest manuscripts now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, with what we have today. And essentially no change in meaning, they discovered. Why is this? Well, we probably know why it is, because the Jewish scribes were very particular. Many times when they copied a document, they would do a word count. And if it didn't match with what they were copying from, screw the thing up and throw it in the rubbish bin. Start again. Now, they found 2 almost complete scrolls of the prophet Isaiah. That's 9 metres long. Imagine if they're copying that thing and they get to the last sentence and they make a boo-boo. Oh, mamma mia, got to start all over again. So this is probably the reason why there's no change in the meaning, all right, because of the way they copied their scrolls back in antiquity. Now, what we can do and what we want to do now is, okay, does the biblical writings that we have today and the Dead Sea Scrolls, do they stack up historical accuracy and with a proven track record of fulfilled predictions? Because they've got some ancient predictions in there, quite a lot of them. So we can check that out. So let's do that. We want to begin by going to ancient Babylon, which of course is in Iraq today. We want to look at the 8th chapter of the book of Daniel, an amazing prediction that we can say, wow, this is amazing. How did they know all that so far back? Now, the book of Daniel was a favourite of the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have many, many fragments of the book of Daniel. Clearly, they were interested in this book, and probably for the very same reasons we're going to share a couple of things here today. But the book of Daniel itself is said to have been written in the 6th century BC. And I want to take a little bit of time on that because you can write things to make them look like they're predictions, right? I could write something here and say that I wrote this back in the 1200s. I'm making it sound like a prediction, but it's written way after the events, written in the modern times. So we want to see, was this really a 6th century BC book? So let's have a look. Well, first of all, there's a number of reasons for we know it is that. It's at least the 1st century because Jesus of Nazareth mentions the book of Daniel. When he was here, he said, hey, make sure you understand the book of Daniel. He was talking about one of his chapters. Then, of course, we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls and we've got plenty of fragments of the book of Daniel. That's the 3rd century BC we go back to. Then something happened during the time of Alexander the Great. He's just destroyed the city of Tyre on the Mediterranean coast there, a Phoenician city. He's coming to Jerusalem to destroy it because they were siding with the Medo-Persians, he felt, and he's going to wipe them out. But the priests went out and met him, and they shared him the very prediction we're going to share with you in just a moment from this 8th chapter. When he saw it, he said, I'm not going to destroy you guys, and he went down onto Egypt. Now that's 332 BC, so that's the 4th century BC, so we know it's that old. But it's even older. There are details only known in the book of Daniel if you had lived in that time. Let me share with you a couple. You may remember the famous story of the kings having a party, the last king of Babylon, according to the biblical manuscripts, Belshazzar. He's having a party and everything's in full swing when suddenly a hand, without a body, begins to write a message on the plaster of the palace wall. Now, the party stopped right there, of course. What does that mean, the king wanted to know. Now, that's where that statement comes from, the writings on the wall. We use that today. It's from this story. Well, according to the 5th chapter of the book of Daniel, the last king was Belshazzar. And historians said, that's wrong, that's a mistake, that's a Bible blunder. We know it was a king by the name of Nabonidus, they said. So this is wrong, the Bible's wrong. Then when the archaeologists got excavating in the Middle East, they discovered some interesting clay tablets. This one here is known as the Nabonidus cylinder. It's on display in the British Museum today. We saw it just a few months back when we were there. What does it say? By the way, it's only about so long. So round, so long. It says, Belshazzar had a son called Nabonidus. Belshazzar's son was Nabonidus. Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. It might be better. I didn't have enough sleep last night, obviously. Now this guy, but was he the king? That's another question, right? At least he existed, but was he the king? Well, then they found another clay tablet. This is known as the Nabonidus Chronicle. It too is on display in the British Museum, about so big. You can see that in the British Museum in London. What does it say? Nabonidus entrusted the kingship to Belshazzar in the 3rd year of his reign. So now the scholars realise, the Bible was right. This guy Belshazzar was the last king. He was a co-regent with his father. And now we know what happened. Nabonidus was a bit of a religious recluse. He went to Saudi Arabia to do his thing to a place called Tema. And before he went, he said, "Boy, my son, you're going to be in charge of Babylon. You're the king while I'm gone." So he's a co-regent. Now, if you know something of the story of the handwriting on the wall, the king wants to know, what does that message mean? Because this must be an omen of something to happen. The Babylonians were big into omens. If you ever go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, you can just see omen after omen after omen from Babylon. They believed all sorts of things, sheep's livers, stomachs of animals, all these told the future of something. So he wants to know, what does this strange writing mean? So he calls in his advisors and he says, if anybody can read that writing on the wall, they will be the third ruler in Babylon. Now you would only know that if you lived back then. The first one is Nabonidus, the father, living in Tema now. Second is Belshazzar, the king in Babylon, the co-regent. The third would be whoever read it. In this case, it was Daniel. So only known if you lived during this time. Daniel, the third ruler of Babylon, he said, because you read it. Very important. But lastly, the book of Daniel is written in two different types of writing. One is Hebrew, the other is what we call Aramaic. Different parts of the book of Daniel are written in those different languages. Now, scholars know that the type of Aramaic that's used in the book of Daniel is a 6th century BC Aramaic. So we know the book of Daniel, from which we're going to be showing you some things, it dates back originally to the 6th century BC because of those things. We know that. So it's not written way after the event. All right, so let's go to the 8th chapter. Daniel sees a war between a ram and a goat. He's told that the ram represents Medo-Persia. Notice what it says. The ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. Now, scholars know today that that's indeed true. The Medo-Persian Empire was like a coalition with these two powers, the Medes and the Persians. Now, notice what else he said. I lifted up my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, meaning stronger, and the higher one came up last. Now, scholars also know that the Medes were in the ascendancy at first in this coalition. They were the number one. Then they had a big fight between themselves, between Astyages the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. And Cyrus the Persian defeated Astyages, whereupon now the Persians become the dominant partner for the rest of the empire, most of it. The higher one came up last. So now the Persians are in the ascendant, just as the biblical prophet said. Then he goes on, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will, and he became great. So here's the prediction. This power, this coalition of the Medes and the Persians is going to go north, and they did. We know that now. That's towards, we would say, southern Russian area. They went west toward what we would call Turkey today, Anatolia back in ancient times, and they also toppled the Egyptians down in the south. So no question, everything so far tracks correct. Now, he says the next one, the goat, represents Greece. Now, you've got to remember, Daniel is writing way back here, somewhere between 600 to 650 BC. That's where he's writing his book. But he's predicting the Greeks are coming next, and that's 200 years down the track. So a long time down. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn between its eyes is the first king. Now, I'm sure most of us know who the first king of the United Greek Empire was, Alexander the Great. In a very few short years, this guy had conquered the Middle Eastern Mediterranean world. Remember, he's on his way to Egypt, going to destroy Jerusalem. Now you can understand a little bit about why I said, hey, I like this idea. I like your book. It says that I'm going to beat the Medes and the Persians, the first king. so he didn't destroy the Jewish people whose priests told him about this prediction. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn, that's Alexander the Great, the first king, was broken. He dies. And in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven, 4 points of the compass, in other words. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall rise out of that nation, out of Greece, but not with its power. All right. Now, I'm sure you know that Alexander the Great died in Babylon. Possibly, we think, maybe of drinking. Couldn't contain his thirst for alcohol. Whatever it was, that's where he died, and that's where his plan for a vast Greek empire died with him. Because after his death, by 301 BC, 4 of his generals had just carved Greece up into 4 regions: Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Greece was now split up in 4. How did Daniel know that? Way down here, around about nearly 600 BC, how did he know all this was going to happen? Greece was going to split into 4 and so on, one by one. 4 notable ones, he continues, 4 notable ones, 4 horns came up toward the 4 winds or 4 of heaven. Out of one of them, out of the 4 winds, or one of the 4 points of the compass, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great. Now, Medo-Persia, he said, is great. Greece is very great. This one's exceedingly great. Toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land, a name for Israel in the biblical manuscripts. It cast down some of the host. This is a reference to God's people, and some of the stars to the ground. And he trampled on them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, a reference to the Messiah. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary or his temple was cast down, destroyed. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, another mention of the Messiah here. So what do we have here? Out of one of the 4 points of the compass, says Daniel, comes this little horn. This little horn, who does it represent? Well, who toppled the Greeks? I'm sure we know our history. Rome. This is exactly what it's talking about. And Rome fits these criteria. You notice, first of all, it went south to Egypt, because this is all south in terms of, in relation to Israel. Daniel's writing from the perspective of the Israelites. You remember Mark Antony, Cleopatra, and all of that stuff, the Romans' involvement in that. Not only that, they went east to Mesopotamia. When I take groups to Iran, we always visit the place where one of the Roman emperors was imprisoned and never came home. He took an army, was defeated, and he ended up dying in what we call Iran today. No question, they went east to Mesopotamia. They went to Israel. It was in 63 BC that General Pompey marched in and came into the area of Jordan, Israel, and so on, and Syria. Number 4, it was greater than Greece. The Romans toppled the Greeks, of course. It stood against the Messiah, or Jesus Christ. Now, of course, you probably saw Mel Gibson's blockbuster movie, The Passion of the Christ. We get that. Even people who are not religious understand the Romans killed Jesus of Nazareth. It cast down the sanctuary. It was in 70 AD that the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the famous temple of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, by the way, built a lot of buildings in Palestine. You can visit the Mediterranean Sea, Caesarea. He named it after his friend Caesar Augustus. The aqueduct that you can see bringing water to Caesarea. He built a fortress in Masada that some of you have probably seen up near the Dead Sea. A fortress over the Jordan called Macarius, where John the Baptist lost his head. A fortress near Bethlehem called the Herodian. Herod had a lot of fortresses. Herod had a lot of enemies. Caesar Augustus once said it's better to be Herod's pig than Herod's kids, because he killed his wife, killed his kids. Pretty vicious man. This is the man, by the way, who tried to kill the baby Jesus in the Christmas story, Herod the Great. Well, he was the one that built the temple. It was destroyed by the Romans. By the way, if you ever go to Rome, make sure you go to the Roman Forum. You'll see the Victory Arch of Titus there, And if you look up underneath, you'll see the Romans carrying away the 7-branched candlestick, just as was predicted, and we see it there being taken away even in the archaeological ruins there in Rome. 70 AD that took place. Took away the daily temple services. No temple, no services. And not only that, he trampled on God's people, it said, the reference to the people of the host and the stars. This is what it represents there. Now, if you know anything about Roman history, they love to kill Christians, right? You can just go to Rome and the story's told again and again. You visit the Colosseum. Many Christians died here, fed to the lions, the wild dogs and so on. Others of them had tar poured over them and crucified with tar poured over them, set alight for the games for the night. The Romans loved violence. They fed on gladiatorial clashes. You know the story. In fact, it's believed by historians this is one of the reasons Rome collapsed. Their love for violence. You can't feed on that sort of stuff and not affect people in society. But just down the road, there's the Circus Maximus. Much more took place down there in terms of Christians being killed. So for about 200 years, on and off, the Romans killed many Christians. Now, you will notice the precise fulfillment of these predictions we've just gone through quickly from the book of Daniel, 600 BC thereabouts. Number one, Medo-Persia will come after Babylon, and they did, because the prophecy is written during the time of the king Belshazzar, the last king of Babylon. It's going to be a dual empire. It was. That's what happened, Medes and the Persians. Persia would come up last and was greater, and that's true. The prophet predicted that. Medo-Persia would go in 3 directions, and they did, exactly as predicted. Not only that, Greece is mentioned by name 200 years before they came to power and said they would topple the Medo-Persians, and they did. On the death of the first king, Greece would be divided in 4 was the prediction, and it happened. We know it from history. The little horn, Rome, would be greater than Greece, and they were. The Romans toppled the Greeks. They did go south to Egypt, as was predicted. They did go east into Mesopotamia, as was also prophesied. They did go into Palestine, as was predicted. And then, of course, they did kill the Messiah, the Christ, and they did destroy the temple in Jerusalem and ended its services, and then they killed scores of Christians. Now, look at that. There are 14 very specific predictions, not hairy-fairy stuff, very specific. All of them fulfilled in just one prophecy. Now, this is either a hoax, meaning someone just got lucky. You have to be pretty lucky to get 14 things right. I don't know what the probability of that would be. It'd be pretty high. What I mean, it's not 1 in 2. Or someone's got some supernatural insights into the future. Somebody's being shown something that's going to happen down in the future. Now, we're going to see clearly this evening, especially when we go to Gary's next presentation. Gary Kent's going to be sharing us an amazing prophecy that brings us right down to our own day. This is just concerning one ancient civilization, or 2 or 3 of them, through antiquity from the time of Babylon. It's the most reliable source you're going to see for knowing the future. It's got historical accuracy, no question about it. By the way, he's one of the most famous archaeologists of modern times, W.F. Albright. He was he wrote about 800 articles and works on archaeology and related topics. He dug in the Middle East for some 30 years. He was actually the director of the American School of Oriental Research, ASOR we call it. That's like the creme de la creme society for archaeologists in the Middle East. So he's no fool, that's the point. I want you to notice what this guy wrote about the ancient biblical manuscripts when it came to historical accuracy. Notice what he said. In the centre of history stands the Bible. Thanks to modern research, meaning archaeology, we can now recognise its substantial historicity, its historical accuracy. To sum it up, he says, we can now treat the Bible from beginning to end as an authentic document of religious history. It's not a bunch of fairy tales, he's saying. It's really something that is historically accurate. Now, does it have a proven track record? Well, we've seen just 14 predictions in one prophecy. All of them came out. But we're going to see far more than that as we proceed. Now, there are at least 800 prophetic verses in this book. 90% have been fulfilled in predictions dealing with people like the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and a whole bunch of other civilizations from antiquity. So that leaves just 10% to be fulfilled or in the process right now. And you're going to see that as we move through the rest of the presentation. We'll see that through Gary's, and the last presentation boggled your mind as we go to the book of Revelation. We say, wow, this is happening today, no question, when we come to the global agenda. So this is the 10% of the predictions we're going to be looking at now for the rest of our evening. So hold on, tighten your belt. Gary's going to lead us to an amazing discovery that was made, a prophecy that shares amazing discoveries. You may want to stretch your legs for a moment, okay? Otherwise, you're going to be sitting for about an hour by the time we finish. When Gary's finished, I think that'll be about the time for the dinner. Thanks, Kevin. You want to say something? Where we get the drinks or where we go to the toilet and so on?
Yeah, we have a water fountain just out the side here, but I was remiss earlier just to let everyone know just to turn their phones down in case it interrupts the presentation.
Great. So stretch your legs. The toilets are down there somewhere?
Yeah, just down the hallway.
Okay. About 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to kick off again, okay? So stand up.